I'll also observe while I'm starting a couple of pleasant things that I teach tomorrow in this room. And we'll observe you've basically followed the same scatter projects as my first years, which is way to the back, even though you're only half as many. So if folks want to come down so you can actually talk to Harvey after, I'd encourage you.
No one's going to do it. It's okay.
No? Okay.
It violates the rules.
The other pleasant thing I'd like to do is to welcome everybody on behalf of the Liberal Arts Committee. So I'll say a little bit about what we've been up to for the last basically 3 years, because I think it helps frame tonight's talk. And I'm not going to try and summarize the discussions, because summarizing the discussions of an interdisciplinary group of academics meeting in committee would be ridiculous. But what I've taken away from it personally is a much stronger sense of how hard it is to define what the liberal arts is about. As we've had conversations between people in my faculty, the Faculty of Arts, the Federated Colleges, the faculty formerly known as Fine Arts, now Media Art and Performance, education, but also outside of campus with folks from high schools and people in the professional colleges. There's some family resemblances, but I have a lot of trouble drawing bright lines. And I think as a teacher and a researcher, I've learned a lot from that. That diversity, that conversation. It's really been a pleasure. So recognizing that is, I think, important, because one of the other things that's been fun as a part of the committee is we've been able to host events like this, 1 or 2 a year. We started with Jack Bowen and David Helfand. Jack Bowen obviously is as from the U of R as it's possible to be, talking about the Regina Beach Manifesto. David is from Quest University out in BC, doing some really interesting things with undergraduate teaching. We had a very powerful talk last year from Ellen Kennedy, who's with an organization called World Without Genocide, talking about the liberal arts in the context of that type of education. And in about 6 weeks, on April the 21st, we'll have John Ralston Saul come to talk about the liberal arts. So a very diverse sets of viewpoints and experiences and backgrounds. And I'm very happy to say that tonight's speaker crosses a lot of different lines, and that's why he had a wonderful conversation with us in the faculty this afternoon. That's why I'm keen and interested to hear what Dr. Weingarten is going to talk to us about tonight. He's by training a psychologist. I think he admits to that. Became provost at McMaster and then was president at Calgary for 9 years. Today he's CEO of an outfit called HEQCO, the Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario, which is a kind of quasi-governmental arm's-length research outfit that looks across their 44 institutions and talks about a lot of things, which I'm sure he's going to talk about tonight. So I'd like to welcome him here. I'd like to say how happy I am that we can keep this conversation going. It's one of the many places on campus where we have it. And I ask you to welcome me to the seat.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. I used to lecture to classes of over about 300 to 400, so I'm keenly aware of fill the room from the back first. Seems to be a constant in higher education. Look, thank you for the invitation. It's one of the things I get pleasure from is the opportunity to talk to people in the business about issues related to curriculum, undergraduate education, and in this case, particularly about liberal arts education. And so as requested, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk a little bit about where the liberal arts education appears to be going. And as you've just heard, one of the first problems you encounter is that there are lots of definitions of the liberal arts. You'll hear different terms. You'll hear people talk about a liberal education. You hear about the liberal arts. You have some people say the liberal arts and sciences. You have now, I notice, the emergence of the terminology of honors colleges that try to capture this in some colleges and universities. But if you look at these things, and I have to tell you, there's probably many a book and many a treatise has been written about the fine distinctions between these various terms. People who are engaged in the liberal arts, I think I can do it with this, let me check. They appear to share a couple of characteristics that define what we mean by a liberal arts education. First is that it's a pretty broad academic experience. You don't have an education at the undergraduate level that's restricted to a single discipline. All you took was psychology courses or biology or computer science courses. And in fact, when you look at a classic liberal arts education, it'll take in everything from arts, sciences, humanities, classics, and mathematics. Pretty broad education, exposure to a lot of different disciplines and a lot of ways of thinking about the world. The second characteristic of liberal arts education, and probably the most important, is that intellectual, social, and personal skills are more highly valued than professional and vocational ones. If you've read Fareed Zakaria's book on the defense of a liberal education, he reminds us that in the 1828, the faculty members at Yale produced a report to defend what was then the classical curriculum at Yale University. And what they said is probably still true today, that the essence of a liberal arts education was that it's not to teach that which is peculiar to any one of the professions, but to lay the foundation which is common to them all. So a liberal arts education presumably is not educating you for a specific job, but gives you a skill set, an intellectual, a social, a behavioral skill set that will allow you to succeed. And what are the kind of things a liberal education is supposed to foster? Critical thinking, communication, ethics, self-reliance, empathy, citizenship, essentially teaching you how to learn for the rest of your life, to be skeptical, to be an engaged citizen of the world. And I'd like you to remember this list because we're going to come back to it later. A third characteristic of what defines a liberal education is that in general, these are curricula that are coherent and they try to create an overall student experience. And so you have an entire institution sitting down and saying, you know, there are some great books that every student at our institution should read. You have a common core in many cases. And you have a way of planning curricula that is not just, look, every individual professor designs their course, or not even just every department defining their own curriculum, but the institution as a whole says, what are the ways that we should work together? What should the overall experience of students be? And let's organize the 3 or 4 years that they are at our college or university to give them an experience that gives them a coherent way of looking at the world and a coherent way of us presenting material to them. And finally, I would say that a fourth characteristic of what defines a liberal education is that there's a high value placed on student-to-student and student-faculty interactions. It is very difficult to conceive of a liberal arts undergraduate education where the only educational experience a student has is sitting in a lecture hall with 100 other students. Liberal arts education typically highly values the Socratic method, seminars, experiential learning. And that's part of the experience that is part of the curriculum. So that's what a liberal arts education more or less is, expressed a little differently in different institutions. Some, for example, don't have as much science in their curriculum, but more or less, this is the kind of characteristics you will see when people speak about a liberal arts education. So what do we know about liberal arts education? We know, first of all, that if you look at Canadian universities, arts enrollment, or enrollment in the arts, is probably the highest enrollments of all subject matters in Canadian universities. But if you look at the trend lines, what you see is that enrollments in professional programs are growing faster than in the liberal arts. These are the data from Canada. It's over a 20-year period. There's been an overall about a 60% growth in undergraduate enrollments in Canada. But which programs are growing the fastest, the most? Business programs, health, engineering and architecture, the sciences. What is showing below average enrollment growth in Canada over the last 20 years? Social sciences, math and computer sciences education, and humanities programs. The drop of enrollment that we are seeing now across North America in humanities programs in particular is especially striking. If you look at applications to the 20 universities in Ontario between the years 2013 to 2015, there was a 15% drop in enrollment in applications for arts programs. If you look at the United States, humanities enrollments from 2012 to 2014, a 9% drop in enrollment. At this point, we are seeing the lowest number of students majoring in the humanities and pursuing degrees in the humanities at any time since World War II. That's when records like this started to be kept in the United States. And if you look at other jurisdictions where enrollment overall is dropping in Canada, the poster child for this are the maritime provinces. Even there, if you look at enrollment changes in maritime universities in the last 10 years, in spite of an overall drop in enrollment, architecture and engineering up 29%, business 10%, health programs 21%, the humanities are down 31%, physical and life sciences up, social behavioral sciences down as well. This is a pattern that's mirrored at the University of Regina as well. I thank the people from your institutional analysis group that provided us with some data to look at this. This is the University of Regina enrollments, a 30-year trend line. Again, there are more students enrolled in the arts and media, art and performance, than any other programs at the University of Regina. But a conspicuous drop in arts enrollments over the last little while. If you look over the last 5 years, here's what you see. A huge increase in engineering and applied sciences at the University of Regina, in science, and arts and media, art and performance is the only set of programs that are seeing a decrease. This trend of decreased enrollment in the liberal arts and the arts, humanities, is reflective of or symbolic or captures part of the dynamic that all universities, certainly all Canadian universities, North American, and many world universities around the world are experiencing now. And so let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges that are facing the public university system in Canada and around the world. The first thing, no surprise to anyone here, is that the public support for universities is decreasing. This is not unique to Canada. This is true around the world, with the exception of some countries, mostly in Asia, that are making huge investments in higher education. But if you look at the rest of the world, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Central America, South America, United States, there is a considerable drop in the degree to which the public is supporting public higher education. So in 1980, Canadian universities got about 80% of their funding from the public purse. 2005, that was down to about 50%. I'm not sure where this will be in 2030. I'm very mindful of the Yogi Berra who said predictions are hard, especially when they're about the future. But if anything, if we look to see, we usually track the Americans with about a 10-year lag in the public system, there's every reason to expect that number to go down. If you look across Canada, actually the Saskatchewan government supports its universities quite well relative to other provinces in Canada and to the United States. Oops, I have to go back. Saskatchewan gets about 59% of the operating revenues in 2013-14 were from the public purse, somewhat different at University of Saskatchewan, University of Regina. Overall in Canada, about 50% of the funding now of the public system is from the public purse. If I showed you the number for American universities, American publics, not privates, the American publics now are being supported less than 20% on average by the public purse. There are public universities like Michigan that you know of, public universities, where the level of public funding is down at 10%, 12%, 13%. Will Canada get to there? I don't know. But that's certainly what the trend lines were in the United States and the trend lines in Canada. One other thing that's important. Students, through their tuition and fees, are now paying, in many institutions, are contributing more to operating funding than the public purse, tax base, does. And that changes the dynamic, and it changes the view of students as to the role they should play or are playing in decision-making at a university. Last thing I'll show you here is that at the University of Regina, and again, you're very typical of Canada, revenues are increasing faster than enrollments. We talk about low levels of funding in Canada, but over the last 10 years, Canadian universities have seen, on average, about a 7% increase in operating funding each year. That rivals the increases that the healthcare systems in Canada see. And enrollments are not rising as fast as increasing revenues. You can see here that over this period, 9 years, operating revenues at University of Regina have gone up about 62%, enrollment about 18%. That's somewhat lower than the enrollment increases in the rest of Canada, but revenues are outstripping enrollment increases. There's one other thing governments know, and they know something about what happens to the funding that they give to institutions. It is not uncommon when the government says we want something out of our university, that the university executives or the public at large goes to the government and says, if you want that from us, you're going to have to give us more money. Because what we can do is dependent on the amount of revenue we receive. And in general, the message that university presidents and provosts and finance officers and lobby groups give to governments is that if you want more performance from us, you're going to have to give us more money. Because our ability to perform and how well we can perform is dependent upon our level of funding. So in the organization that I work, one of our legislated mandates is to do an annual review of the performance of the Ontario public higher education system. And the way we do this is we have a basket of about 34 performance indicators organized in particular ways. So we measure the performance of each system in each of the Canadian provinces, because each province organizes its higher education system a little differently. And we can then ask the question of, what is the relationship between the funding that a provincial system receives and its level of performance? And the answer is that within the levels of funding, within the range in Canada, funding does not predict system performance. There are some provinces that have low levels of relatively low levels of funding and perform quite well. There are other provinces that have higher levels of funding and don't perform as well. And this has shifted the thinking of some people in government to say, we don't want to talk anymore about the level of funding you get. We want to talk now about what's happening with the funding levels you get. What outcomes are we achieving by the dollars that are being invested by both students and the public in your institution? While all of this is going on, people are beginning to question, for a variety of reasons, the value of a university education. Just about every day, you can pick up some publication that'll have some article asking the question of whether it pays to go to university. Is there value in it? And it's hard to dismiss these when some of the publications asking this are pretty reputable publications like The Economist. This is the cover of an Economist special article asking whether it's worth it to go to universities. This was the second time in a year that they had done this analysis. And I can tell you this, when The Economist starts asking the question of whether it pays, is worth it to go to university, you gotta know that other people, journalists, politicians, students, business people, are asking exactly the same question. And part of the reason they're asking this is because one of the things we know is that, or we talk about, is that something seems to be going on the quality of experience our students get at our universities. No one said it better, in my opinion, than Robert Campbell, who's the president of Mount Allison University, one of the great liberal arts universities, colleges in Canada. And this is what he said. We all feel and know that the character of the undergraduate experience has deteriorated in our lifetimes, especially so in the last decades, and we know in our heart of hearts that this experience can and should be much better. And part of the reason you have people questioning the value of a university education, why students are questioning it, is because of what I'll call the jobs narrative. Because now, if you look at the discourse around universities, it's all about the job. Let me tell you something. It's always been all about the job, at least since World War II. If you look at every student survey I know of, and you say to students, what is the dominant, not the exclusive, but what is the dominant reason you chose to go to pursue a post-secondary education? The dominant reason in every survey I know of says, it's because I wanted to get the credential that would get me a good job. If you speak to governments about why a government is prepared to put the public purse, tax dollars, into higher education and a public higher education system, they will also say to you, we need to educate individuals to work, to succeed in the economy, to get a job, and to maintain a robust economy. There's a lot of opinions about whether universities and colleges are actually doing a good job in giving students in fulfilling for students the dominant reason they came here to our institutions, and in fulfilling the investment the public makes for them to get the credentials to maintain a robust economy. This is one of my favorites. This is a quote from Max Blau, president of Wilfrid Laurier University, in our op-ed piece he wrote in 2013. He wrote, when a university graduate is recruited, the employer has in their hire an exceptional communicator, an adept researcher, a problem solver, and a critical thinker. Not everyone shares this view. This is from a study that was done by McKinsey in 2012, where they asked the question, does post-secondary education adequately prepare students for work? 72% of educators said yes, 45% of graduates said yes, and 42% of employers said yes. There's lots of surveys like this. The most striking one is a juxtaposition of a 2014 survey of chief academic officers in North America and a 2013 Gallup poll. 96% of chief academic officers say university does a good job of preparing students for the workforce. Only 11% of business leader agrees. If you look at other McKinsey reports, about 45% of students who get jobs hold the view that what they did in their post-secondary education was not a major contributor to them getting a job or to the success they enjoy in their job. And what is this leading to? This is leading some employers to question the value not only of the experience, but also of the credentials students walk out with. And so you have places like the Atlantic, and actually a pretty informative article, the best job candidates don't always have college degrees. You have companies like Penguin, Google, who don't ask for transcripts anymore. They don't want to see them. They don't think they contain the kind of information they need to make a decision about whether this person sitting in front of them is the right person to hire or not. And while all of this is going on, the world of higher education has become extraordinarily competitive. I have a visual metaphor for the world of universities today. It's this. Just to flesh it out, those are universities. Pigeons walking along, scrabbling for any morsel of food that might be on the ground, pecking away at what they can eat. That's the competition. You don't see it. It's hiding, but at some point it jumps up and it eats you alive. We have a clipping service at the place that I work, and it is astonishing the number of things that are happening in the higher education world now, non-traditional things, that are competing with the traditional university. And part of these competitors are capturing the view that technology and therefore time and place aren't as important in higher education as they used to be. I don't subscribe to the view that's been expressed by Bill Gates that 25 years from now there will be no university campuses. I don't subscribe to that. But I do know that the places I can go to get information are not necessarily the seminar room or the classroom in a traditional setting. I actually go to the Khan Academy quite a bit. When I want to know something, I can learn almost anything for free by going to usually a 10 to 15-minute lecture delivered just in time in a simple way that teaches me what I think I have to know. But it's not just the Khan Academy. It's MOOCs, and who knows what the future of that will be. It's a Western Governors University. People talk about Western Governors because it's online. Some people like it, some people don't. The essence of Western Governors University has nothing to do with whether it's online or not. It has to do with the fact that it is targeting people who have some post-secondary experience but never finish their programs. And you can call up the Western Governors University and say, look, this is what I do now, but I aspire to that job. What do I got to do? And they do an assessment of what you now know. They do a competency assessment of what you need to know and be able to do to get the job you want. They assign you an individual mentor who develops a customized curriculum for you by scouring the world to find credited programs that you can take online, and you get all of, and when you acquire the competencies, they give you a degree. They're now franchised in, I think, 20-plus states in the United States. So you get a University of Texas, University of Florida degree. And you get all of this service for the same tuition, maybe even a little bit less than a student pays for an undergraduate program at University of Regina. And they back it up. Oh, by the way, Minerva University started by the former president of Harvard, the former president of the Carnegie Association for the Advancement of Teaching. Started 2 years ago, totally online. It is a liberal arts undergraduate university, received the largest private sector investment ever made in higher education in North America, and their aspiration is to recruit students around the world and to give them a liberal arts undergraduate education that will rival Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. And then you have folks like Udacity comes in and says, not only will we give you a degree, a credential that people will recognize, but like other places, we'll back it up. And this dynamic is leading to an environment where universities are being held much more accountable than they used to be before. There always was some relationship between the degree of autonomy institutions had and the degree of accountability they were subject to, for example, to the government. If you look now, most jurisdictions, the level of accountability is increased and their willingness to intervene in their public institutions is much greater than it was before. I have a slide that I update all the time. I call it government shots across the bow. This is where I collect things that governments are doing that I suspect 5 years ago they never would have contemplated intervening in this way. So what are these kind of things? Oh, here, a brawl over tenure on Wisconsin campuses. A great public higher education system, the Wisconsin system. The legislature says we don't want tenure anymore. We don't want it anymore. We don't think it's relevant or necessary. The Guardian reporting on UK universities. Fascinating. Huge experiments going on in England, in Britain, over tuition. What is the latest scheme? That the government will allow different universities to raise tuition different amounts. And the amount that you will be allowed to raise your tuition will be determined by how satisfied your students are on the education they receive. So student evaluations now will drive the government regulation of tuition. Oh, here's a good one. Nova Scotia, essentially in a maneuver, says if you're an institution in financial exigency, we have a process where we can essentially put your collective agreement into abeyance. And we give the university 18 months to restructure themselves. Essentially puts them under bankruptcy protection. The collective agreement is not relevant for those 18 months and they have to restructure. And if not, they're gone. We'll see if that survives a court challenge, by the way, as many of these things will. Japan, Minister of Higher Education in Japan says, why am I funding the social sciences and humanities? I'm not going to fund them anymore. I'm only going to provide government funding to STEM disciplines. So the liberal arts, social sciences, we're not putting government funding into that. Created a huge hue and cry, which is surprising because that's exactly what the UK did about 5 years ago, where they put government money behind some programs in STEM, but no government money behind liberal arts. Tennessee, outcomes-based funding, and this is one of my favorites, it's the most recent. A fellow gets up in the state legislature in North Carolina. Again, some great public universities in the state of North Carolina. And he says, he says, professors aren't teaching enough. So the state is going to mandate a teaching load. And the teaching load the state wanted to mandate was a 4 + 4, 8 courses a year. It's pretty high. He had to back down, but he didn't back down all the way. He backed down and he said, okay, maybe 4 and 4 is a little too much. So here's what a new idea. If you're in the humanities or the arts, it's 3 + 3. If you're in the sciences, it's 2 + 2. Well, that didn't go over so well. And there's a fight. In the end, the bill is repealed. But let me tell you, it will come back. Because at least several governments that we talk to are on the verge of doing similar things. The governments are intervening. The governments want more productivity. The governments are going to performance-based funding. And in general, what governments are insisting on now is a level of measurement of what is going on in their public higher education institutions at a level that far exceeds what they did before. And so when you talk about this, we should remember Einstein's admonition to us, not everything that counts can be measured. not everything that can be measured counts, and he's right. But I have to tell you that the mood of most governments now is not to affiliate with that view by Einstein, but to affiliate by the view of Peter Drucker. What gets measured gets done. And they want certain things to get done, and they will, and if the universities do not report and measure, they are going to impose measurements, a requirement for measurements on the institutions. Okay. What does all of this have to do with the future of liberal arts education? That's the dynamic out there. But people in the liberal arts and sciences who are subject to this dynamic, who see their enrollments dropping, have to somehow figure out, how are we going to respond to this challenge? One possible response is this. Stick your head in the sand and hope it goes away. And by the way, people laugh when I put it up, but I actually think it's well worth contemplating. One thing I know for sure, universities will outlast any government out there. The difficulty is that when a new government comes in, they don't usually just reverse things, and the trajectory that we're going on of greater accountability, greater concern about liberal arts is pretty clear. And so what is the right response if you're not going to stick your head in the sand? And what I would like to suggest to you is that, in fact, the appropriate response is to proclaim loudly, clearly, and with great enthusiasm and confidence that, in fact, the liberal arts education, the classical liberal arts education, is exactly the kind of education that provides the greatest value to our students today, and that provides the greatest value to society. I don't think we should be hesitant about proclaiming that, and let me try to show you why. And to show you why, I'm going to return to the jobs agenda. We follow employer surveys. And the employer surveys that we follow in particular are surveys that ask the question of, what skills do you most highly value in your new hires, and the ones where you're having the most difficulty finding those skills in the students. And when you look at about the last 20 surveys, this is what comes up. The things that employers value the most, the things they most need to see in their future hires, are communication skills, critical thinking skills, problem-solving skills, and interpersonal skills, like ethical behavior, like resilience, like adaptability. This list should be very familiar to you. And the reason it should be very familiar to you is these are the goals that have been articulated for centuries of the goals of a liberal arts education. And so what we have is a great coming together of what apparently governments, employers, students want, and the skills that we can impart or foster, help develop as part of a liberal arts education. It's not just about jobs. We live in a tough world. You're going to have an election. People are going to have to make a decision based on platforms. Which party do I vote for? What car should I buy? How big an economic stimulus should I put in? How big a deficit should I run in a country to stimulate the economy? I was saying this afternoon, most decisions made in healthcare in Canada today are based upon risk analyses, population risk analyses. To make decisions that students will have to make in their lives, they need exactly these kind of skills. To think clearly, to behave ethically, to analyze information, to use evidence, and that's what we hope a liberal education is all about. Now, if there is such a great coming together of the goals of liberal education and what students in society want, why is there so much angst out there? Why do you have so many people making such disparaging comments about an arts and humanities education? What's not right here? And I would suggest to you that there's two things that aren't right. One thing is that when we take students into our liberal...
Some trouble with the connection. Please try again in a moment.
Siri wants me. I don't know why Siri wants me. That when we take students into our liberal programs, we forget to tell them that they're not just learning history, they're not just taking a course in ethics, they're not just learning political science, they're not just learning logic, they're not just learning philosophy. They're learning critical thinking, communication, the ability to analyze, the ability to communicate. We just don't tell students that's what's going on, and as a result, they don't think that's what's happening. We ran a little experiment. We work with a bunch of institutions on the measurement of critical thinking in Ontario. And one of the institutions we work with did a brilliant, I think it's brilliant. They have a program that they think not only teaches students the skills for this particular communication program, but that it also teaches students all of these generic skills we're talking about: critical thinking, problem solving, resilience, etc. And what they did is they changed the way they wrote the course outline. Instead of a traditional course outline that says, look, you're going to take this course, this is what every lecture is going to talk, this is the topic for every lecture, these are the textbooks you're going to read, they wrote a course outline that says, look, when you take this course, you will learn this content, yada, yada, but you are also going to learn a variety of other skills. You're going to learn how to think. You're going to learn how to be a better writer. You're going to learn how to use evidence to solve a problem. They changed nothing in the course. They delivered the course with the same instructor in exactly the same way. All they changed was the course outline. Prior to the change in course outline, when you asked students what the course was about, none of them mentioned critical thinking, communication. After they changed the course outline, you said to the students, what did you learn in this course? Well, I learned everything about the visual arts. I learned about this concept, that concept. But by the way, I learned how to be a better critical thinker. I learned how to be a better communicator. I learned how to analyze problems. I learned how, if I fail, I can do better the next time. So part of it is that, in fact, in many of our liberal arts programs, we do teach these things. We just forget to tell the students this is what about. And students know one thing. If you don't say that's what I'm learning and you don't examine it, they don't think it's there. So if all they see are dates and concepts, that's what they think they learned. Second, so that's the first thing. We could just be a little bit more articulate about what we actually do when we teach our courses. But there's one other thing which turns out to be very important. And that is, we live in a very cynical, skeptical world. And if you tell someone, if I go to the Capitol and Queen's Park, and I say, look, you know that when students take this program at Brock University, they've learned a lot. They've learned to be better critical thinkers. They've learned to be better communicators. No one believes me. And why don't they believe me? Because they have a pack of people out there telling them that that's not going on. They have students telling them that's not going on. They have profs telling them that's not going on, because profs are complaining about students can't write, they can't do arithmetic, they can't do this stuff anymore. And they have all the employers telling them students aren't coming out with the right skills. So the skeptics and we live in a skeptical world, say, it's not enough for you to tell me students are acquiring these skills. You have to show me, because I'm from Missouri. And so what you have, I'll bypass this. The good news is that there's a movement out there for articulating and measuring learning outcomes. And it's a very simple concept. The concept is that if you're a university, you should tell students at your university, you should define for them that when they graduate, this is what they will know, and these are the skills and competencies they have. These are the things they will be able to do. And then you just have to do one other thing. You have to measure whether the desired knowledge and capacities have been acquired. And we almost never do this. And so when I go and participate in a debate in higher education, and on one side is someone saying, undergraduate programs are crappy, the kids don't learn anything, they don't learn any of the important skills and competencies, they don't learn those things that are important, employers are saying that. And then on the other hand, I have someone saying, you kidding? We do all these great things. I was on a TV show once where the university president said, you can't hide at my university. Every student is a great critical thinker, etc. The truth is we don't know who's right. But if we learned anything as undergraduates and as graduate students, we learned how to solve this problem, to determine who's right. And that is measure the skills. It's not, I don't think, every university administrator and faculty member I know says, if you say to them, should a student be a better critical thinker when they graduate from your institution? They say, of course. Should they be a better problem solver? Of course. Should they be able to read and write better than they did when they came in? To use numerical information better than when they came in? Of course. There's only one thing left to do. Someone has got to go and measure whether those things are true or not, whether in fact those skills have been acquired. I know there are people who object to this, but I will say this to you, that every research trial we have participated in, when Canadian universities go and measure skills and cognitive acquisition of students and the change from entrance to graduation, institutions look good. Students do learn. But if you can't show a skeptic that that's in fact what's going on, no one believes you. And more to the point, when we do research and find out that some of the things we thought that were fostering these skills are not doing such a good job, by measuring skills acquisition, like critical thinking, problem solving, communication, literacy, numeracy, we can actually figure out where we need to improve and what pedagogical techniques will actually be most effective in generating the improvement. I'm not for a moment suggesting this is easy. Highly mindful of the quote from Woodrow Wilson when he was president of Princeton and tried to get the faculty there to do some changes to the curriculum. Changing a college curriculum is like moving a graveyard. You never know how many friends the dead have until you try to move them. We should be unhesitant and unapologetic about the importance and the value of a liberal education for students today. It's more important now than ever. We just have to live up to the ideals of a liberal education, and we have to be more disciplined and rigorous in demonstrating that, in fact, it's working. Thanks for listening.